today we are talking percentages. I'm going to show you how to work out the percentage of any number, and then we're going to be making one of these. When we say percent, it means out of 100. So percent literally just means out of 100. So as an example, if we have 9%, that means 9 out of 100. So as a fraction, it'll be 9 over 100. If we say 63%, that literally means 63 out of 100. Again, 63 over 100 as a fraction. If someone asks you to find 10% of a number, what they're asking for is basically to divide the number by 10. Now let's look at some examples. So if someone asks you to find 10% of 40, that would mean dividing by 10, or 10% of 600, again dividing by 10. And the last example, 10% of 8, again dividing by 10. So if we have a look at the first question, 10% of 40, it means 40 divided by 10. So 40 divided by 10 is of course 4. If we have a look at the second example, to find 10% of 600, you are doing 600 divided by 10, which is equal to 60. And the last example, 8 divided by 10 is 0.8. Okay, if you've got that, I've got 3 questions for you to now have a go at. So once I've written the questions, if you want to press pause and just find the 10% of these 3. So the first question is to find 10% of 300. Remember, off and times mean exactly the same thing. And then 10% of 5. And then 10% of 20. So as a reminder, 10% you are dividing by 10. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. So 10% of 300 is of course 30. 10% of 5 is 0.5 or half. And 10% of 20 is of course 2. Well done if you got them right. Okay, now let's have a look at what 5% is. So to find 5% of a number, you know how to find 10%. So find 10% and then just half it, because 5 is half of 10. Okay, let's take a look at some examples. So for question 1, find 5% of 40. Find 5% of 40. So let's do this in two steps. So step 1 would be to find 10% of 40 first. And the answer is, of course, 4, because you're dividing by 10 when we find 10%. And then step 2 is you just half that answer, because we're finding 5% and 5 is half of 10. So 5% of 40 is half of 4, which is, of course, 2. So 5% of 40 is equal to 2. Okay, now your turn. Have a go at these 2 questions. So 5% of 400 and 5% of 60. Okay, let's have a look at the answer. So 5% of 400 would be 20, and 5% of 60 is equal to 3. Let's have a look at 15%. So 15% is quite easy. We know how to find 10% and we know how to find 5%. So 15% is just 10 add 5. So find 10% first and then find 5% and add them together. So 15% of 600, step 1 would be find 10%. So 10% of 600 is, of course, 600 divided by 10, which is 60. And 5% of 600 would just be half of that. So 15% is 10 add 5%, which is equal to 90. So 15% of 600 is equal to 90. Okay, let's have a look at 30%. So 30% is 3 lots of 10%. So to find 30% of a number, find 10% of the number, and then just add another 10% and another 10%. And you do the same to find 40%, 50%, 60%. So let's look at example. So 30% of 80 is equal to, so the first step is to find 10% of 80. So 80 divided by 10, which is of course 8. And then add another 10%, add another 10%. So that's 30% of 80. Like 3 times 8 is equal to 24. So your answer is 24. So just remember, with percentages, it's easy. You know how to find 10%, you know how to find 5%. If you were asked for 30%, it will be 3 lots of 10%. Now with 1%, it's similar to 10%, but you are dividing by 100. So let's look at some examples. To find 1% of 600, you are doing 600 divided by 100, which would be equal to 6. If we look at another example, 1% of 80 is 80 divided by 100. 80 divided by 10 is equal to 8. 8 divided by another 10 is equal to 0.8. So your answer to 1% of 80 is equal to 0.8. Okay, I'm going to go through another example now. So if a question asks you, or you had to find 21% of a number, you would simply find 10%, another 10%, and then 1%, because that equals 21. Okay, another example would be if we had to find 35% of a number, you would find 3 lots of 10% and a 5%, because that equals 35%. Okay, have a go and practice for 5 minutes, and then once you've done that, come back and we now do the next step, make some art out of percentages. First of all, you're just going to need some paper, coloured paper, plain paper, either. And what I've done is I've just cut this in half, and then if you have washi tape, then with the washi tape, I've just cut some washi tape and I've just chosen 2 colours and I've just stuck it down. If you don't have washi tape, don't worry, I will also show you what you can do just with some colouring pencils or some pens. So if you don't have washi tape, then you just need to get a pencil and a ruler, and I've just divided the sections. I've done every 3 centimetres. If you want to do every 2 centimetres, every 1 centimetre, it's up to you about the thickness that you want to choose. And then with your colouring pens and pencils, you're just going to decorate each section however you want. So I'm just going to use some pen and then colour over it using a coloured pencil. So this is just for the background of your percentage art. Once your background's ready, you're now ready for the next step. So on another sheet of paper, you're just going to draw an outline of maybe the first initial of your name, or you can just do a shape. So I'm just doing the letter S here. Remember to do it lightly in pencil, so if you make a mistake, you can go over it, and then you just need to cut it up. And then grab a black pen, and you're just going to write some percentages. So first of all, I've started with some 10%. And then you can, after you've done 10% of numbers, you can go on to 5% and 20%. There's no particular order for this. This is just you practicing how to find percentages of different numbers. So I've started off quite simple, and then I'm going to build it up. Okay, once your letter is ready, you can stick it onto your background, whichever one that you've done, either the washi tape or the one with the colouring pencils.